So, with that being said, and without further ado, let's get into the case of Daniel LaPlante, shall we? Hi again, this is me from the future to give you the devastating news that this is actually going to be a two-parter. So tonight you'll be getting part one of the Daniel LaPlante story, and you get to look forward to the second part next week. I hope you're ready to get spooked. Bye. Alright, so Daniel, aka Danny LaPlante, was born in 1970 in Massachusetts. Now, we don't know a huge amount about his childhood and his upbringing, but I can tell you for a fact that it wasn't an easy one. Now, he actually suffered a lot of sexual, physical, and psychological abuse at the hands of multiple adults in his life, and mostly his father, which is horrible. I mean, because there's no way you can escape your father, right? If you live in the same house as your father and your mother, there's no way to escape the abuse. So, as you can imagine, this wasn't the best for his mental development. Now, at school, Daniel, he didn't have many friends because he was a bit of a weird child, to say the least. His looks or his personal hygiene didn't interest him even in the slightest. So he was this greasy, dirty looking kid that was generally described by his peers as creepy. So to say that they were reluctant to engage with Danny is probably an understatement. Now, in his early teenage years, Daniel's teachers, they started to kind of worry about him. His general lack of hygiene and reluctance towards his appearance, and also his complete lack of motivation. That's what prompted them to refer him to a psychiatrist. So, I mean, I'm a teacher, as you know, and it is actually part of our job to watch out for warning signs like that, a lack of personal hygiene, a lack of motivation and stuff. It's usually a sign that something more serious is going on behind the scenes. So we actually, as part of our job, have to watch out for signs. So these teachers, they were doing their job, is all I'm saying. But this therapy with a psychiatrist, it could have been a good thing in his life. It could have been a turning point, and he could have had help, and that could have changed his life for the better. But things took a really dark turn. So Danny's psychiatrist eventually started making sexual advances towards him, which that is so disgusting to me. That is just a complete abuse of power. And not to mention that Danny was an early teen at this point. He's really not having the best of luck. So the psychiatrist made several advances towards him, and then during the following year, he would be sexually abused by the psychiatrist during every session. That is wild. This, as you can imagine, left a lasting impact on Daniel's psyche, as he had been betrayed, let down, and abused once again by another adult in his life. Now, I should say that there are plenty of news, I just want to give you like the full background of it so we can kind of understand or attempt to understand what was going on in his mind and like what happened to put him in this state of mind. So, to resolve his problems, Danny resorted to crime. Because what else, right? As a teenager, Daniel started breaking into people's home and stealing things, right? But by age 15, he had perfected his MO and he had established a pattern, and trust me, it's a dark one. So, not only did he break into people's homes to steal things, but he would purposefully leave some of his own items behind in the home, items that didn't belong there, or he would move certain items out of their usual spots, so it would be obvious to the owners of the house that they had been moved or somebody had been in the house. Which, to think about that happening truly chills me to my core. Like, can you imagine coming back home, opening your door, and then noticing something really obvious being left in a place that it's never usually in? Like, do you see what I mean? It can be small things like, for example, your TV remote being left on like the hob or in the shower or something like that, like a really unusual place. Or what if like your settee has been moved or something? Like, I can't imagine the sheer panic that must cause when you open your door to that. Our Danny certainly enjoyed playing mind games with people, and soon enough, those mind games were like the only reason for his break-ins. He really enjoyed the horror that he caused with these people, and that was why he did it. That was why he carried on breaking in and moving stuff or leaving stuff. Now, in 1986, Daniel was 16 at the time. He had gotten his hands on the phone number of the Andrews family. Now, it is not exactly determined how he got that phone number, but the most likely scenario is that he probably broke into the Andrews house before, and that's how he obtained the number. But that's never been confirmed or anything. So, the Andrews family consisted of Brian, who was the dad, and his two teenage daughters, Annie and Jessica. And they had unfortunately, like really recently, lost their mother to cancer, so the family was understandably so, like, still grief-stricken. So then, in 1986, Danny obtained the number, as I said, and he started phoning this family. He spoke to the girls a few times, though it would seem that he would mostly entertain Annie on the phone. And he had told her, and this is actually hilarious, right? He told her that he went to a nearby school and that he had seen Annie a few times, just around, and that he liked how she looked, he liked what he saw. So, supposedly, he asked a friend for a phone number, and this friend, this supposed and totally existing friend, allegedly went to the same school as Annie, right? Are we all following? Okay. Now, he also told Annie about his looks, but of course, looking the way he did, he couldn't exactly be honest about that, so he catfished her over the phone in the 80s, and he told her, and this is just any stretch of the imagination if you know what Danny looks like, which is like this, right? So he told her that he was a tall, blonde, athletic, good-looking and well-educated boy, which, quite frankly, obviously, could not be any further from the truth for Daniel LaPlante. Now, after speaking to each other on the phone for a while, Annie and Danny finally set up a date in real life. Now, can you imagine, and I'm serious here, just try to imagine the sheer horror that Annie must have felt when she opened the door and it wasn't a tall, handsome, blonde jock that was stood in the doorway, but Daniel. Sweaty, greasy, icky, dirty-looking Daniel. That is the stuff for nightmares. Gross. So anyways, Annie probably suffered from the same problem that many of us suffer from, which is not wanting to seem rude to someone that you literally owe nothing to. So she went on this date with him anyways. Now, of course, unsurprisingly, that was a mistake. So for this date that Annie shouldn't even really have gone on in the first place, they went to this fairground, right? And according to Annie, it was arguably the worst date of her entire life. She made excuses and she left only an hour into the date because Danny had, of course, been a complete creep. So she was totally right to do so, by the way. I'm completely supportive of Annie leaving. So apparently, at the fairground, they were chatting, as one does on a first date, and the subject of Annie's mum came up. Now, for most of us, when we learn that somebody's mum has passed away due to cancer, then we react in like a sympathetic way, in a supportive way, but not Danny. No, not Danny. Now, don't get me wrong, he showed interest in the matter, we've got to give him that. But the problem was that he showed a little too much interest in the matter. Now, mainly his interest would lie in the gruesome details. He had asked Annie to describe exactly how she felt when she learned about her mum's passing. He was also dying to know whether or not her mum had suffered when she passed, and also exactly how much. Which, I mean, if I had a red flag right now, I would be waving it all over the place. And luckily, Annie also saw this huge red flag and she made up an excuse and she left the date, which was the only right thing to do, because that is just incredibly disturbing. I mean, Daniel, come on. You must realise how wrong that sounds and how creepy and horrifying that sounds before you ask it, right? Some people. No. Understandably, Annie decided that, after she had left this horror date, she never willingly wanted to see Danny again, right? And she never willingly saw him again. Now, she said that the meetup had left her horrified after all of this had happened, with this date and with Daniel being a creep, the girls, Annie and Jessica, one evening decided that they would do a seance in the basement to attempt to contact their mother so that they could speak to her once more. Now, honestly, seances are always a bad idea in my book. Like, that never has anything good ever come from a seance, right? Even if it does, there's always additional bad stuff that comes with seances, right? So they decided to do a seance in the basement. Now, during the seance, nothing in particular actually happened, but later that evening, as they were asleep in their bedrooms, they received a rhythmic knocking against the bedroom walls. They couldn't believe it. It seemed as though their little seance sesh had actually worked. So in the dead of night, Jessica and Annie spoke to the unseen force, assuming it was their mother. They would ask her questions, and those questions would be answered by more rhythmic knocking on the walls. Now, the knocking did not stop after that one night. In fact, the knocking became so regular and carried on for so long that it damn near drove the girls to insanity. You know, that is not very hard to understand and to believe. If in your house you constantly hear knocking sounds on the walls, I mean, that would drive anyone insane. And apparently they were getting like sleep deprived and everything because it would happen at night as well. Now, even though the girls initially thought it was their mother that they were communicating with, over time it started to feel less friendly, and the girls were doubtful that they were still talking to their mother, so they were creeped out. Now, as this carried on, they would have various objects in the house that started to disappear and then reappear in a different place. For example, items that were laid out on the table would disappear one day and then would find themselves strewn across the floor the next. There were even instances where the girls would come home and they would find actual furniture that had been moved from one side of the room to the other. That must be so horrifying. Now, at this point, they already kind of figured that the spirit, the presence that they had invited into their house wasn't their mother. But at this point, when the furniture started moving, they were like, they were convinced that the seance hadn't left their mother in, but a malevolent spirit, like a demon, if you will. Now, the girls' father, Brian, if you remember him from the beginning of the story, he refused to believe that the ghost stories that Annie and Jessica were spewing were true. Now, he actually had a theory about this, so he thought that it was the girls themselves who were doing this as a cry for attention. After all, they had just lost their mother, and he was working like a lot more. He was around less, working more to support the family. So, jump to one evening in January of 1987. The girls were home alone, and the knocking had started again. Though this time, something was a little different. The knocking didn't seem to come from the walls like it usually did, but this time the girls could swear that the knocking was coming from the basement. Now, as a step that I would skip. They went to the kitchen and they armed themselves with kitchen knives and they went down into the basement to investigate. These are some really brave girls. They entered the basement and they could have never anticipated what they saw when they went down those steps. There, on the wall of the basement, was a message, and it was written in what seemed to them like blood. I'm in your room. Come and find me. Now this is worse than bloody Harry Potter, isn't it? Because you know how in the Chamber of Secrets there's this scene where there's a message written in blood on the wall and it says, "Enemies of the air, beware." Now this is like a million times more horrifying. I'm in your room. Are you kidding me? That is wild. Now, luckily, the girls didn't go and check in Annie's room, and they basically got really freaked out, and they immediately legged it out of the house and straight to a neighbour's home, which is probably the smartest thing to do at this point. Now, when they got there and they told the neighbour about what had happened, this neighbour was also obviously freaked out, and they called the girl's father. Now, Brian immediately came home and he looked at the state the basement was in, and he was all the more convinced that it was Annie and Jessica themselves who were responsible for this. He decided that something needed to be done, and he was coming more from a place of like wanting to help his daughters work through their struggles, right? So he decided that it would be a good idea for the girls to go to counselling so they could work on their grief and, just generally their mental state and their struggles, right? So Annie and Jessica, they did go to therapy, and as they were undergoing their therapy, peace and quiet miraculously returned to the house. The knocking stopped, and the malevolent spirit seemed to have just vanished. Now the girls were understandably super relieved that they had gotten rid of the demon that they had supposedly let in, and Brian was also like super pleased with himself because he thought he had done the right thing by sending the girls to therapy, and he thought the therapy had worked. But then, several weeks later, the demon let the Andrews family know that he was still there in a truly horrific way. Now, once again, kind of the same scenario as what happened in January. The girls were home alone when the knocking started once again. This time, the sounds didn't come from the walls, they didn't come from the basement, but they seemed to be coming from Annie's bedroom. Now, once again, the girls did something that I personally would not do. I would skip this step and immediately leg it out of there. But the girls went to investigate. So they went up to Annie's room, and they were met with yet another terrifying message written in what looked like blood. I'm back. Find me if you can. This episode is going to be 2 parts, and this is where I'm going to leave you for part 1. Next week, I'll tell you the rest of the story, and so much for choosing to hang out with me tonight. Thank you so much for watching this video. And I will see you guys next week for the second part of this story. And trust me, you don't want to miss this.